Okay, the next one, which is probably going to be contentious, I took the tourism communications money and I took $100,000 out of it and left $40. And everything that I've been able to read and understand, we at this point should not encourage more people coming to town because we are having difficult time taking care of the ones that are coming to town. And I would hope the other commissioners would expound on this, but last year we were probably as busy as we could be considering what we were dealing with, and we did no advertising. St. Michael's is a brand. St. Michael's is a location. People know St. Michael's like they know Martha's Vineyard, like they know Nantucket, like they know Charleston. At this particular juncture, it would be my read that we do not need to actively promote the community until we totally understand where we land here.
That doesn't mean no promotion. It means we're going to reduce that amount by 100,000, but still, I think there's some social media types of promotions that we can still do, but not to the great extent of TV ads and magazines and the expensive items. Social media can be just as effective in a lot of instances and much less costly. I think you're right. Over this past year, we were expecting accommodations, taxes, and everything else to be way off, but they haven't been. And that was with no advertising. So I think, we need to maybe cut back by $100,000. And if it looks like halfway through the year, that visitation is falling off the cliff, then we can ramp it back up again. But for now, I think we could exclude 100,000 of that budget. And
so you're going to reduce this 140 down 100, or what? This is what you've come up with now for the tourism communications. This figure that you have here now. Is this what you're going to use, or is this what you want to reduce?
They want to reduce it down to $40,000. I have great concern to cut it back that far. I think you're right. This spring and summer will probably do just fine using social media. But when we get, depending on how this pandemic recedes, will determine how you need to advertise. When people start getting on planes and start going elsewhere, you don't want to be forgotten. Yes, we are a brand, but we're also a brand of we're close by and we're the go-to when times are tough. The conversation I had yesterday with the economics professor from Salisbury about the study that they can do for us. He said he advised Chrisfield to, this summer, definitely use your social media, but you need to, the first part of next year, you need to start going after people again.
I'd like to offer some thoughts on this. This is a massive cut. This is a proposed 70% cut in advertising for the town of St. Michael's. Anyone who isn't clear on what Kim does, she advertises to specific markets, to specific areas, to extremely high-end visitors to St. Michael's. 2020 was an anomaly. We absolutely got lucky in the amount of people that came and visited our town. And yes, I will not disagree that in the early spring, it was too many people. We weren't able to accommodate them because our restaurants were not open. And then they were at very far reduced capacity. Furthermore, as someone who is on the streets of St. Michael's every day and talks a lot with the public, visiting public, most people had never been to St. Michael's, nor had they heard of St. Michael's. They did not read an advertisement that was placed by the town of St. Michael's a year ago or 6 months ago. They kind of said, hey, we live in Glen Burnie, we live in DC, we live here, we're going to drive down. It was a one time, they'd never been, they'd never heard of it. They weren't, so because of that, some of them were wonderful people, but they were not our target demographic by any means because they did not know or have a beloved spot for St. Michael's. Next year, we won't know the ramifications of cutting this until it's too late. So David, I appreciate you saying that if things start to dip, we'll change course, but advertising works far in advance. The ads that Kim places in the next few months will be laying the seeds for people that will visit here in 2022 and 2023. So I fear that by making a massive 70% cut in the budget, it could have, even not advertising this year, could have ramifications that we haven't seen yet. Cutting the budget as we did and reeling back advertising for those potential visitors in 2022 is yet to be seen. So I think that that's something we have to understand. Also, before I can even entertain or discuss this on any level, I need all of the business owners. I need Cassandra Vinn, I need input from people who I think would be absolutely aghast. I mean, did you happen to mention this to the two business owners last night, that you were thinking about cutting tourism dollars by $100,000? I can't imagine.
Yes, we did.
Oh, wow. Okay. I'd love to hear their response to that, because this is terrifying, I think, to most of the business community.
They were not horrified.
Okay,
By cutting the budget by, what is it, 65%, 70%?
I think it's 70 if it's off of $140,000.
I was in a meeting in Annapolis on Wednesday. It was a board meeting for MML. And this came up because as sitting on the executive board, I am the treasurer of MML. So the question came up about this same issue on all the other towns. And I was very surprised to find that all towns that were there, that were participating, have cut their budgets or eliminated advertising this year. So it's a
That are tourism related towns?
Yep. And it was a big surprise to me. And a lot of them are up and down the Chesapeake. And they're towns, a lot of them are towns the same size as us. And they said the same thing, that they don't feel like they have to advertise. It's, and the ironic part about it was last night I went into the hotel down in town here and was introduced to a couple, and they're from Berkeley Springs, West Virginia.
Yeah, been
And
there.
so curiosity, I asked, how did you find St. Michael's? And they said, word of mouth, and everybody in our town knows about St. Michael's. Now, Berkeley Springs, West Virginia is 6 hours away. And they know all about us. And there is no advertising in that area on us. I ask those questions because I'm very interested when I run into people, where they're from, how they found St. Michael's. And I'm just curious to find it. I go to Garrett County and get into a conversation with people and say where I'm from. Oh yeah, and they can say, oh yeah, we know the crab claw, we know this. And it's very surprising to understand that it's all word of mouth.
Well, I don't agree with that, because I do advertise in Northern Virginia. And if you get any newsletters for any of the businesses or any of the publications in Northern Virginia, that's easily going to cross over into the eastern part of West Virginia. So I tend to not agree with that. I mean, Chesapeake Bay Magazine, I mean, there are millions of ways that somebody can find out about St. Michael's in West Virginia.
Sure. I mean, I'm just saying what people tell me. And the question, especially on Wednesday at NMML, that towns are not spending their money, they're saving their money, and they are not advertising this year.
But do we have an obligation?
It was a big surprise to me.
Do we have an obligation to the accommodations that are collecting these amounts of taxes to keep St. Michael's at the forefront?
But here's a question. I mean, we're looking at the survey that I suggested, and Kim, do we have an idea of the impact of advertising on certain demographics? I mean, do we get enough feedback to know that we're getting so many eyeballs on a specific TV ad or a specific magazine print advertisement to know that that is what motivated somebody to come here? With this survey, one of the questions we're going to be asking is, how did you hear about St. Michael's and why did you decide to come here? Have we ever gotten that kind of direct feedback of what motivated people to come here?
I think Chris talked about that a little bit. My predecessor, which was a tourism board, did a collection of that information. I'm sure he'd be willing to share it with you. And I mean, I have done a similar tack than that they did with advertising, only much more of it, because we really do have targets. We need Washingtonians, Philadelphians, and Baltimoreans, and Northern Baltimoreans, to be more specific, and West, Northern Virginians. So as I said, I do know new audiences. It's impossible to track print advertising, and it's impossible to track broadcast. But we require analytics for all online advertising, and from feedback from my representatives is that we do extremely well, better than most advertisers.
The only way to track it is to ask the customer who arrives here, how did you hear about us?
You can certainly do that.
Yeah. And we've never done that.
It just puts the onus on businesses to ask, people who are trying to relax to do a survey. That's just, it's up to you. And if Chris said it was no brainer, then why not do it?
Absolutely. And in terms of the question of, is it fair to the lodging industry to cut back advertising that brings people to lodging? Well, the advertising brings people to the town, not just necessarily the lodging industry, but the accommodations tax that's levied on the lodging industry is what funds all of this advertising. The restaurants, the businesses, everybody benefits from it, but there's only one segment of the economy that's paying for it. And so what is fair when it comes to advertising?
Well, I think you eliminated a business tax to support businesses at some point. I had a business in Easton, and I paid $300 a year. They called it I can't remember, personal property tax for a small business. It wasn't a big burden. If you feel like businesses should share, maybe a small fee like that wouldn't be deadly to a small business, and they could be part of the pie.
Well, that's something
and I agree with the burden being on the accommodation seems a little unfair, and the amusements and attractions.
So, I mean, if we lose foot traffic because of a lack of advertising, there used to be a business association in this town that stepped up to the plate with advertising and everything else, and I guess that kind of fell apart under its own weight.
They did not do advertising.
I
don't think they did very much advertising in the history of their organization.
Yeah. Well, I just
they don't have enough money.
If there's consternation about the lack of advertising, I think it's up to the businesses who benefit from the advertising to help step up. Right now, the lodging industry is carrying the entire load.
But they also need the businesses to support their lodging. I mean, the businesses have to exist. And if it helped them at some point to, and I don't want to monopolize this conversation, but you're asking me questions. So if some set of commissioners took away the business inventory tax to support their being here, because they already have expensive rents, expensive everything. To stay in businesses is not a cheap proposition, I think, in this town. But the accommodations need those businesses. So I think it's like, if you trickle down, I don't know if that's called trickle down economics, but they need each other.
Yeah, there's a symbiotic.
Relying on the accommodations, I mean, they rely on the businesses because of the quality that we offer. We offer amazing quality in restaurants, shopping. We have great museums, distilleries, a place like that don't have to pay these taxes. But they're here to get people to come here.
Yeah, I think part of the key to this entire discussion is doing a survey that tells us exactly how people learned about St. Michael's and why they decided to come here. And until we have that information, it's hard to pinpoint the potential impact of a reduction in the advertising.
Well, I think also it does come back to the point, and it was just mentioned, right? There's a lot of things clearly that are in play here that a lot of people have strong opinions about. But one thing is clear: the money that's used for advertising is dedicated to this budget. This is not taxpayer dollars funding this advertising. This bucket of money comes from this tax that continues generating more accommodations and more tax. And so for me, if you want to remove that, what are you going to do with that $100,000? You're going to give it back to the residents? Does that make any sense?
No.
It's $100,000, and we're looking to fund a $130,000 cut. So
we're funding other areas of the tourist economy through it.
What part? I mean, I know what Gene puts toward it. Are we a shortfall on that? Are we at a shortfall on what the balance of the accommodation tax is covering? Like, do we not have enough money for extra public works, police, bathrooms? Are we shortfall there? I'm just curious, because I thought I've seen Jane's reports before, and I think it's reasonable what she, charges to those departments for tourism.
She gave me a copy, Kim, and it was dated 2017, I think. A lot of it I agreed with, some of it I didn't, but I don't see that 100,000, disappearing into thin air. I look at it as, okay, that part of that money should probably do another police officer. The police budget is huge. This would help compensate an extra officer on Main Street on Saturday, which is obviously the biggest day. It also could go for the Friday and Saturday trash pickup, which is generated exclusively by the tourism, not by the residents. So it's not like Jamie goes poof. It's not going to poof. It basically, the way that, I look at it, and David and I have talked about it quite a bit, it's going to still participate in the tourism part of it, but it's going to go subsidize some of these things that possibly need to be, updated or increased. And it shouldn't fall necessarily on the backs of the residents, because it's stuff that they're not creating. It's stuff that's happening because of the tourist trade on Main Street. You mentioned the restaurants. No tourism town can succeed without restaurants. Restaurants are the one ingredient that drives it. We have that. We have it, in spades, and as you said, excellent. So the money is not going to disappear. It's going to go to other areas like Gene's list, and some of the things in there on our list are sort of outdated. I mean, because we have a list that was 3 or 4 years old, because we have a job description that's 3 or 4 years old, this thing has all changed really fast in the last couple of years. So personally, I don't see the money going away. I see it being allocated continually in a fashion that promotes that particular business or businesses, which is the tourism part.
Well, but David mentioned that if we see that a downturn in visitors and we need to increase the budget, how will you do that if you've taken it out of the budget?
When I put this number down, part of it was because it was the number that I thought was in the ballpark. I also put it down to instigate this conversation, and obviously it's doing that, and I think that's a good thing.
Yeah.
Because it has changed. The ground rules that were in place when you got the job are not necessarily the same as today. So, by putting this out there, this is motivating this conversation, which I think is totally healthy.
It's a valid conversation. I won't disagree with that.
Conversations.
But I'd like to give Commissioner Brinehurst and Commissioner DuPont another opportunity to tell me again that last night you discussed with 2 business owners specifically the idea of cutting advertising at all or up to 70%, and we told you that was okay.
They were of the opinion that St. Michael's is a known commodity.
And you said we considering cutting advertising, and they said that would be okay?
I don't know if we mentioned that specific amount, but we talked about the impact of advertising on the town of St. Michael's and how much they benefit from the advertising. And they seem to feel that they were doing quite all right without all the advertising that was cut last year, that their businesses are known, St. Michael's is known, and people come here regardless. And as to the notion that when people start being able to move around the cabin again, so to speak, and start getting on airplanes and going off to far destinations, that may be true of the upper end of the economic scale, who can fly off to Paris for a weekend. But the upper end of the economic scale can also say, hey, I've only got so many hours and so much time, let's run down to St. Michael's for the weekend. The lower end of the scale, which is still part of our demographic, will come here on the buses, on the cruise ships, on the whatever means necessary, because they find this to be an affordable alternative to jetting off to some far off destination to spend their vacation dollars. So I'm not sure that the return to travel, I mean, one of the economy stations this morning was talking about Delta Airlines, for instance, is back to 85% of their passenger capacity. People are traveling again. It's already happening. But I don't think they're just going to say, oh, geez, I've been longing to go to Thailand for decades. Now's the year to do it, and forget about St. Michael's. I mean, we fill a different need, a different niche than
Sorry, I'm so sorry, Pam. I have to finish this sentence. David, I appreciate your perspective, but I'm specifically talking. I had to ask you that question again, and I hate to do this, but there's one thing I won't stand for, and I won't stand for falsehoods. And I reached out directly in the last 10 minutes to both the business owners that you spoke to, as well as a few others, and asked them if we were theoretically discussing cutting the budget to advertising, can they tell me how they would feel? I had a resounding, aghast response, and both business owners told me that not one word was discussed about advertising or budget last night. So I'm sorry, but at this point, I can't. I want to listen to the discussion. I want to listen to the opinions, but I have a serious shutdown when I feel that I'm being lied to. And so right now I'm in that zone of being very, very frustrated because I obviously wasn't there, but I try not to speak for people when they're not present unless I'm 110% sure that I'm advocating for them word for word. And so whether or not that's true, we still have this discussion on the table, which is a valid discussion.
Oh, and I'm not saying we told them specifically we want to cut $100,000. We talked in broad terms about how they survived over the past year throughout the difficult times and the fact that there was no advertising, and yet they were still able to make a profit on their businesses. So to me, I got the sense from that conversation that advertising wasn't at the top of their priorities at the moment, but that they knew that they were a commodity, that people know about them to begin with, and that they expect big crowds this summer.
But about how we got this influx of people last year, despite advertising, we could have put a gate up and people would have flocked here last year because of the unnatural nature of people getting out of their homes in the city and just wanting to get to the closest bucolic area. And that's not natural. Mm-hmm. That's not a natural trend. So I think, and also knowing that they were all at a lower capacity, so they could only serve 25 to 50% of the people that they normally could. Yeah, everybody got by last year. Everyone's still standing. And so I think that that's a different, so I'll give you the benefit of the doubt and think that in your mind, you were discussing the broader issue and that informed your decision to go forward. But I'll say what I said at the beginning of this conversation, that until we talk about a 70% cut, which is massive, 10%, 15%, 20%, that's something that is reasonable perhaps, if we don't have the money for it, right? If we can prove that the money needs to desperately go somewhere else. But to cut this massive, I'm going to need the key stakeholders at the table. And that's going to be accommodations as well as restaurants, because I believe that they very much rely on and value the advertising that the town does, because they can't afford to do that. Mm-hmm. So that's,
and I was going to say is that I did not do no advertising last year. The budget was cut in March of 2020. It was put on hold basically. But I don't think it was much later than June, I guess it would have been July 1st, where we had the new budget, which was cut by 15 to 20% is what I'm remembering. So that isn't no advertising over the course of the year. It's still, I mean, I still have $50,000 to spend. In May, which is my major push, I spent most of my budget in that last month and it was committed.
Mm-hmm.
So things ran on in broadcast and in print and in social and in online. So I was out there as much as I could be.
So, and how much do you have left in your budget now?
I believe it's around 50.
Around 50.
Yeah, we have bills coming in because we just placed a few things.
Right. So if we cut the budget 50,000 instead of 100,000, could you survive another year on that?
Well, if you're talking about next year's budget, then you're talking about cutting $147,000 budget down to 90. Am I right with that, Jean? Am I close on that?
Mm-hmm.
But I mean, I agree that you should get some buy-in, but I don't know. That's not my purview.
So Jamie, you think we should have a meeting with all the businesses, the accommodations, the businesses on Talbot Street, get them together and find out what it is?
Joyce, thank you. I'll be very clear. I don't think we should cut $1 from the advertising budget, but before we even consider it and before we even say that it wouldn't affect the businesses or that they're not offended by that, I would like them to know exactly the proposal. I'm shocked by this drastic cut and by the fact that nobody knows. And this is perhaps our last budget session. And so the public's just going to find out, the night of the hearing that this is a massive cut. And I find it unnerving. So no, my suggestion is that we don't touch it. However, if we consider it, then there needs to be an actual understanding of how it's going to affect people and also how they're going to react to that kind of decision.
And Jamie, I got one thing to say. I do not appreciate the fact that you think that I lied to you or we lied to you. We didn't lie to you. We went over there in good faith to deal with a music issue that did us. And I take offense that you would even say that in a meeting where we're trying to, have an adult discussion about town expenses that affect everybody. And that's how I feel about that. That's a strong statement to put out there when you got people that are volunteering basically to try to make these things happen.
I agree, and I'm offended by it as well, Ted.
I'm sorry, because I seem to be offending everyone lately when I say things no one likes to hear. And this isn't an easy position for me either, right? So we're all advocating to try to do what we think is right. And having a discussion is one thing. But when it just seems to be so personal lately, which is a really hard position for me to be in, because I have never sat here with an agenda, but I try to sit with an open mind. But when I feel that every meeting I come to, there's new information and there's, we got together and we thought this was a great idea. And if I have any question about it, I'm told that I'm being argumentative or that I'm not listening. And so I'm also pretty offended.
I don't think you're argumentative
in all of this.
Jamie, I don't think you're argumentative. I think wholesome discussions are important.
I think we need a broad-ranging discussion of all these things. And, there are issues that have been raised here that are worthy of consideration. Maybe we don't make a drastic decision right now, but I think we do need to have those avenues of conversation open. There's a lot of unknowns, and I'd like to start getting some answers. And that's another reason why I proposed that survey.
You're talking about a budget, okay? You're talking about using money for police because that's part of tourism, because we have to expand it. So instead of saying that we're going to cut anything, we just say we're taking part of this money to pay for part of these other things that are part of the tourism, which are going to come out of the tourism bill. The trash on the weekends, the extra officers that we have for the events and over here. I think it makes good sense to use some of the tourism money to go towards the extra payment and the extra service that we have to provide and the security and safety of the people that come here. So So I think that's a better way to look at it.
I thought we were already doing that.
To a degree, we are, yes.
You would agree, but I think you need more.
Hmm.
Well, should we move on from this subject since there seems to be a hot potato and we got still a lot to go? So we'll put this down as unresolved. It did create a discussion, and heated discussions are good. Wholesome debate is good, and so if we accomplish one thing, we accomplished that.